Folks, let's be painfully honest. It's time for the iPad, especially the iPad Pro variant, to go. The iPad is everything wrong with Apple's product lines, and since it's now rumored that Apple might be planning touchscreen MacBooks, the useless boondoggle that is the iPad Pro has become more apparent. Let me explain. First, let's look at the iPads versus the MacBooks from regular regular old iPad to Pro. iPads are priced from $330, which is a pretty good price, to $2,200 for the 2 terabyte 12.9-inch iPad Pro. The MacBook Pro line starts with the Air, $1,199, and then goes up to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, $3,500. Of course, you can spec that out even further, and it can get to $8,000 or whatever you want to do. But on the bottom end, the MacBook Air and the iPad Pros obviously occupy a lot of the same air. See what I did there? If Apple does start making touchscreen MacBooks, it's hard to see why anyone would want to spend more money on an iPad instead. Yeah, so $2,200 versus $1,190. Anyway, when you look at the iPad, especially the iPad Pro, you really don't get much more value from the actual function of the device, whether you pay $330 or $2,200. Yes, you get better screens and more attractive designs, but for 90% of all iPad buyers, that $330 iPad is going to meet probably 100% of their needs. Once you start paying more, you really start hitting diminishing returns. The $2,200 iPad Pro is not $1,870 better than the $330 iPad. They share the same terrible operating system. I mean, seriously, have you ever tried to use an iPad for any kind of serious work? If you need to fill out a form or something, you've got to go to a computer. Apple refuses to port their Pro software to the iPad, like Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro. The multitasking went from bad to worse with whatever this Stage Manager thing is that they have in iPad OS 16. The file management system, we've all talked about the file management system. People have been begging for Apple just to put a version of Mac OS on the iPad, which should be completely possible since the iPads now have the same chips inside as the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro 13 and all that kind of stuff. But Apple refuses to do so for reasons unknown. But we all know the real reason is money. If they can sell two devices to somebody instead of just one, that's what they want to do. Let me put this to you in, say, the plain language. You can buy a 2022 MacBook Air, 256 gigabytes of storage, 8 gigabytes of RAM with the same M2 chip that's in the iPad Pro models. You get a very good keyboard, you get a very good screen, you get a fancy new design, and that's $11.99. Half the time, that $11.99 model is on sale for $9.99, which it is right now at this moment. The 12.9-inch iPad Pro with the same specs as that MacBook Air, plus a keyboard because, we want to have them to have the same thing. $1,575 if you go with the Apple Magic Keyboard, which is probably the best keyboard that you can go for. So you want to have best versus best, right? Of course, if you're going to buy an iPad, you better buy that Apple Pencil for $125. And once you get over $1,600, you're just a couple of $100 away from the base 14-inch MacBook Pro. Wait for a sale, and you're there. Think about that for a second. Ah. The only thing that differentiates the iPad Pro at that point is that you can take the keyboard off. Is it really worth paying that premium for a product that costs more than the laptops in Apple's lineup, runs an inferior operating system, and doesn't take advantage of the powerful hardware you are paying for because it makes you use a mobile operating system with mobile apps instead of some version of full fat Mac OS? There are solutions if you want to use an iPad and do video editing. But in the case of audio recording, you pretty much have to use GarageBand, which is a fun and powerful program in its own right. But if you're somebody who uses a regular DAW on the regular, it's a toy. There are no full versions of Pro DAWs on the iPad. And with its form factor, musicians, producers, people who, songwriters, whatever, that should be a really attractive market segment for the iPad. But Apple has stubbornly refused to meet the needs of those users when it comes to the iPad. By comparison, devices like the Surface Pro line have nicer keyboards than the iPads, better pens than the iPads, and they run Windows. Not like Windows Lite or Windows Mobile, Windows. So you don't have to choose between some kind of hobbled mobile app that isn't what you normally use or the real thing. You just get to use the real thing when you want to use the programs that you use. iPad Pros should be powerhouse ultra mobile work beasts that can do all of this stuff, and but they're not. There are plenty of ways you can bend the iPad Pros to your will and hack them into serviceable daily devices. There are all kinds of websites all over YouTube that show you how that's done. Really, I think it's just so you can fetishize buying a ton of accessories, but hey, that's a whole other discussion. If Apple introduces touchscreen MacBooks, they'll be going back on years of refusing to go there for reasons. Steve Jobs said touchscreens don't want to be vertical. I mean, the truth is, if they went to touchscreen MacBooks, they'd cannibalize the iPad market, especially that higher end, more expensive cash cow of an iPad Pro with all that sweet, sweet green stuff that comes with it. The time has come for Apple to either put Mac OS on the iPad Pros or put touchscreens on the MacBooks and admit that the iPad is a device that had its day and now is just a clunky, half-baked mess that people keep overpaying for. I mean, just to have the $300 model and be done with it. But for some reason, when it comes to the iPad, Apple's reality distortion field is still in full effect. And honestly, it's time to change that.